You ready, Jack? All right, Jack, go ahead.
Yes, Rebecca's ready to go?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. This is the June 1st, 2020 Budget Committee meeting, which is scheduled to start at 5:30. Call the meeting to order. And is there any changes to the agenda, Randy?
No, there's not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Move approval of the agenda.
Is there a second?
I'll second. I don't think we need it in committees, but I'll go ahead.
Okay. And Randy, is there any public comments?
No, there are not, Jack.
Okay. And then I guess we can go right into 4 or 5A, right?
Yeah, I'll turn the meeting over to Steve and let him move us through the agenda.
Okay.
Randy, do you want me to share my screen or do you want yours on? Oh, can't hear you.
I'll do mine, Steve. I think I forgot to give you rights when I set up the meeting.
Oh, okay. So we're going to start with item 5A, the projected end of the year balance. Just want to start with kind of a high level reminder that the 1920 budget was supposed to have a planned deficit of $433,686, primarily due to the final year of the funding decision connecting Fund 10 and Fund 21 together. So we've talked quite a bit about this, but just as a reminder, we would expect to see a deficit end of the year balance when we are done with the audit this summer. And the contingency budget has primarily been expended through costs associated with additional educational services at Heritage. We also talked at several meetings ago about the school closure and the impact that the school closure would have on the district's end of the year balance. We talked about topics like the food service fund, Fund 50. We talked about the savings in Fund 10, specifically in areas like transportation. The committee provided feedback to administration to capture back building and department level funds for activities and events that did not actually take place due to the school closure, but still allow building and departments to carry forward dollar amounts related to unspent supplies, materials, equipment. So just kind of a quick recap of kind of the moving pieces with the end of the year balance. Did anybody have any questions on that topic or would like any additional information?
Were there any significant savings from the unused funds?
So my plan for that piece, Mark, is to wait until we have all of the bills paid for 1920 to reach out to each of the building and departments and ask them. I'm going to have to ask for their help in calculating what that dollar amount should look like. I can certainly look at lines like transportation as an example and know what that would be. But for events and activities that didn't take place, I'm definitely going to need their assistance. Some of the larger carryover balance, some of the larger amounts that'll be coming back to the district would be within the athletics budget, with all of the spring sports not taking place, the officials, the transportation, the supplies, all of those costs that were not expended. That's likely going to be one of the larger ones. And then with the rest of it, I'm going to end up needing some assistance from the admin team and the administrative assistants to really help determine how much of an ending balance for a building or department was really due to activities not taking place and how much of it was due to their planned work of carrying over balances. Does that make sense?
It does. Without trying to unduly burden you, I just was wondering how far down the line you think that will be, because some of those resources might be able to be reapplied towards the food reference later in the agenda,
Right.
and a couple other items. And so, do you have a guesstimate as to how far down the road before we'll know those numbers? August?
I would say August, probably about the first week would be about when we'd have most of that figured out.
Okay.
If there weren't any other questions, I'd go on to item 5B, budget changes.
Steve, I guess one question with that, if like the food balance and things like that need more funding, could we pull back some of this carryover as well?
Yes. So by state law, the Fund 50 food service fund can't be negative. And if it is negative, the Fund 10 fund balance will have to pay in to get it back to even. That's an occurrence that happens in a lot of districts on an annual basis. It's just we haven't had to do that because our program has had a financial balance. But yes, that's correct, Jack. If it turns out that our Fund 50 goes in the hole, let's say 50,000 this year, that is definitely a discussion that we will need to come back to because we will have to transfer funds from Fund 10 to Fund 50 to make it whole.
Are you talking, kind of prepping the buildings that we may have to tap into their carryover?
So what we prepped them with is the feedback we had from the budget committee on taking a look at their carryover balances from the perspective of events and activities that have not taken place. Because we've not yet had the discussion on what are we going to do with the savings from, as an example, the athletic budget, or savings that we're pulling back from the buildings, as Mark was referring, tapping into that to potentially paying for the food program. It's unlikely we would have to go further than that, but we'll have to calculate what that would look like and compare it to what those deficits would be. But if you remember, the transportation savings were around somewhere between 125 to 150,000. Then if you add on there the savings for athletics and the savings for the buildings and departments, it's likely we're going to be talking in the 200,000 plus range for savings coming back to the district budget from the school closure. The food service fund will not go that far into deficit because there's already a fund balance. So we will have funds remaining, at least in the 19-20 year. The 2021 year is a whole different story, but for 19-20, the food service fund should not need any more coverage beyond what the board has already, the budget committee has already advised us with pulling funds back from buildings and departments. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does.
Okay. So item B, budget changes. So every year during the month of June, there is a formal budget change process that's presented to the school board If the school board approves it, it's published in the paper, and it's considered a formal amendment to the budget that was approved during the month of October. This year, we're bringing forward budget changes for only a couple of items. That would be changes in grant revisions and changes in the state of Wisconsin library aid. I wrote a note in the board book to explain that typically we like to bring forward more budget changes at this time of the year. And due to the fact that I was out for 3 months, and then the week I came back was the COVID-19 school closure week, budget revisions that we would like to have completed did not take place. And I put in here examples of what that would be, like salary and benefit increases or the district contingency fund. I think it's clear, it's important to make clear though, budgeted funds are available. They're just placed in an accounting function meant as a placeholder, and the budget change process was going to move them to the accounting functions where they actually were spent. So in the end, it's not an issue about lack of funds. It's an issue of funds being in the wrong accounting function. In the ideal world, we would have brought forward budget changes like we did last June and like we did the June before. But when you combine me being gone for 3 months and coming right back to the COVID-19 school closure, we did the best we could with getting the budget revisions that we had completed in front of you. And it's just kind of a reality of the situation. So there really isn't much presented in this document other than the couple of changes I wrote up in the notes. But I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have on this topic.
Any questions?
I'm good.
I'm good.
Jack, we would be looking for a motion to recommend the budget change document for the June 8th school board meeting, please.
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The next topic, fund balance classifications, is really a procedural piece. The school board is annually required to approve the fund balance accounts prior to the close of the fiscal year. I've attached the accounts that we're currently using. I did note in yellow for you in the Fund 21 area. So Fund 21 is gifts and donations. What I noted in yellow is new for 1920. There's a series of account numbers that have been reserved for student activities and clubs to comply with new accounting requirements. Basically, what we had to do was move our Fund 60 student activity accounts into Fund 21 due to national accounting requirement changes. And in that process, each activity, so an example would be high school student council, has an account number assigned to them so that at any moment in time, they can check and see what their available balance is. So I have highlighted that for you in yellow as the one change for these account numbers compared to the year prior. And if there are not any questions, I would be asking for a motion to move this forward to the June 8th school board agenda for approval, please.
Any questions?
So move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, thank you. So item 6, the 2020-2021 budget planning process. So attached, you will find the second draft of the budget that we are looking to move forward to the full board on, again, Monday, June 8th. I started in the notes is just a reminder of the 6 key parameters that the drafts of the budget are based on. I'm not going to repeat that because you've seen it before. The only difference is on item number 5. I had mentioned this to you before, but Brian had worked to change the FTE for a Phi Ed position, as he had worked with the principals on that. So the FTE is slightly lower than what you saw in the first draft of the budget. So the FTE for additional positions wasn't a change in what we were necessarily doing. It was just a change in the calculation of the FTE for one of the positions. The changes that we've made in the second draft of the budget, we were going to make any staffing updates based on the additional schedule changes or reallocation proposals, but the only thing we have in front of you in the second draft right now is the Phi Ed FTE change. Updates to the gift fund. So Fund 21 is the gift fund. We asked all the buildings and departments to enter in budgets for Fund 21 based on the fact that all of the Fund 60 accounts are now operating in Fund 21. So you will see updated budgets based on the new accounting requirements for Fund 21. Then we asked all of the building and departments to update their fee revenues for their buildings, and then their corresponding expense accounts that go with those fee revenues. An example of that would be if the Prairie School added $1,000 to their field trip fees for 2020, 2021. We increased the budget by $1,000. We increased the field trip expense by $1,000. So they corresponded and matched. I did list in here some of the changes that are coming for the third draft of the budget in July. We are receiving information on grant allocations, any additional staffing changes, updates to funds 50 and 80, updates to the summer school budget, and anything else that really comes up between now and the July board meeting. We do have a few items broken out separately under this agenda item for the second draft or budget planning. So it's up to the committee whether or not you want to ask questions now or whether you want to get through B, C, D, E, F, and G and then circle back. But I would be looking at the end of the discussion on agenda item 6 for moving the second draft of the budget forward. You may seek to amend the second draft as presented based on the information in B, the administrative restructuring. You may want to make a change based on the transportation conversation we have in G. So I'll leave it up to you as to how you would like me to proceed from now. Just keep moving through the various letters, or do you want me to stop and pause?
Steve, could I ask just a couple of questions?
Of course.
On page 9 and 10 in the second draft of the budget, when it talks about building fees, is that like the field trip fees that you just mentioned? Is that building fees?
Yes. The fees that the school board approved were kept the same except a few minor ones like recorders. But our policy on student fees allows the buildings and the departments to set fees for items like field trips, you know, to determine how many they plan on going to and what the costs would be. And they have the ability to collect those funds at the building level and then expend those funds on their budget. So yeah, it would be fees not approved by the school board.
So then district fees on the next page, those are the fees that we approved?
Yep.
Okay. And then on the next page, page 11,
Yep.
What is CSF?
Oh, yes. I had that question from someone else, and I realized it's a little too educational jargony. So we'll fix that. CSF refers to the Common School Funds, which is a state of Wisconsin grant for libraries. And those are funds that are required to be spent annually out of a fund that comes from the state. So we'll make that more understandable. But it's common school fund grant funds from the state of Wisconsin.
Okay, all right.
And Steve, if I can piggyback on that, do I recall correctly that the next budget erases that contribution from the library fund? Or am I mistaken on that?
I
From the state legislature.
No, I have not seen that one, Mark.
Okay, maybe I just misread that then. Okay, and then the other question in terms of are the Booster Club holdings that work with our accounting system part of the athletic numbers, much like the PTO would be in our elementary schools, or are those not calculated in the budget?
Sure. So I think you're referring to page 14, right, Mark?
Yes.
Yeah.
So in Fund 21, in the line that says athletics, what Mark is referring to is some of the booster clubs have chosen to have the school district handle their accounting for them. An example of that would be cheer. We now handle all of the accounting for the cheer group. A couple of years ago, they had a private checkbook and requested that we handle that for them. So yes, in that line that says athletics, any booster club that requested the district to manage their funds is included in that line.
Thank you.
So Steve, on that page for Arboretum, 30,000, that's their PTO money?
Yes, so any funds that are separated by building, so the PTO operates with, they have a joint account where the money goes in for the events that they share, and then there's school-based accounts. And we've got a separate line for the joint account. Typically, most all of the money that's put in that joint account is then taken back out when they figure out how to evenly split it between the schools. But there is sometimes money, small amounts of money remaining in there, which is why it's shown on that line. But yes, those PTOs have lines inside each of those schools. That joint account is just shown because they have a process of sharing some events that have taken place during the year.
Okay, thank you.
Steve, how do you go from, at Arboretum, you go from 0 in 1920 to 30,000 in 2021? Is that an estimate or?
Yep. Yeah, great question. So the reason for that is the elimination of Fund 60 from the national accounting changes. Those changes were required to be implemented in the 1920 school year, which we did. And then about a month ago, we learned that the changes were delayed due to COVID-19. So we're actually a little bit ahead of the game on this one now. But the Arboretum activities were previously accounted for in Fund 60, the student activity account. Now they are required to be accounted for in Fund 21. So previously Arboretum did not use Fund 21, and now they have to for accounts like their PTOs.
How does the high school go from 130 to 273?
So the high school had the most significant use of Fund 60. So all of the activities at the high school were previously accounted for in Fund 60. Examples like the high school student council, FFA, there's a number of them. So all of those activities have been transferred from Fund 60 to Fund 21. So the large increase in the Fund 21 budget is primarily due to the fact of the national accounting requirements and to eliminate Fund 60 and move those activities into Fund 21.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions?
No.
Should we just keep on moving, plowing through?
We'll jump into B. I've attached the memo from Randy. So this was a memo that the board saw previously, but Randy updated it based on the meetings that he had with the goals committee and the special board meeting that took place earlier last week. Randy, do you want to run through that, or do you want me to bring it up?
No, I can walk through it. And it's generally, folks, the same memo that I had shared with the board previously. What I've updated it with is really just some of the direction from the goals committee and then our meeting last week as a whole board. So what you'll see in here is the consideration of the communications position and also the assistant principal at Heritage. And what I've also articulated is some of the pieces as far as the long range restructuring plan, some things that we put on hold, like the executive director of teaching and learning, filling the communications specialist. If you recall, that's both split between Fund 10 and Fund 80. So just trying to articulate what the dollars are and how many dollars we need additionally to just address that. An estimated cost on a 210-day contract for an AP at Heritage. And then the one piece I just wanted to share with you is, particularly as you go down the road with the assistant principal piece, one part of that restructuring plan was to bring some greater consistency to administrative contracts. Brian Grabarski has worked with me on looking at length of contracts per the different levels in our comparable groups and also some of the comparable pay aspects. So what I'm trying to do is also align some of our contractual days. So if we were to hire an assistant principal at Heritage, I would recommend that it be on a 210-day contract. If that were the case, then I think it's also important for us to address the 200-day contract that we have at Prairie there and add 10 days to that. Brian has gone through and looked at comparable costs as far as what it would be to increase that individual from 200 to 210 days per the going rate for that position. And then also looking at the middle school, which has a 200-day assistant principal. That was created actually at a time when we were having we wanted the position and dollar availability allowed us to afford 200 days. If you want to put that in line, which we think makes sense, with the intermediate school and the high school, all of those APs are at 238. And then the other piece that was part of the restructuring plan that, as we talked about it at the goals committee, was just bringing into line some of the work with the curriculum department. Tim and Amy and I have had some conversations with regards to restructuring that department so that Tim could focus in on the 712 and some additional duties, and Amy could focus in on the pre-K 6. So really elevating her position to gain responsibility in the CNI area. I've updated the dollar amounts to accomplish all of that, which is the biggest dollars are the AP and the communications position, and then the other dollars associated with the other adjustments come to around $203,000. And then what Steve and I did was brainstorm different places that we feel that we could allocate funds for those positions. And one of those was articulated in the original memo. We figured there'll be about $125,000 to $200,000 just in anticipated savings from folks who've either left our district or retired from our district, and then the subsequent hires and the differential between the pay and benefits for those positions. Usually it's between $125,000 and $200,000. I think Brian has been tracking that throughout the year. Also looking at potential things with transfer of service and open enrollment, both areas that bring in funds to the district as we fully utilize those. Fund balance is certainly an option too. I was mentioning to Mark, as you had a question about this at a previous meeting and when we talked on the side, when we brought in the assistant principals at Prairie and at the intermediate, we had initially paid for them out of fund balance in the first year, and then some of their dollars were associated with the subsequent referendum in 2014 that then paid for those moving forward. So that's another option. And then some other pieces that we looked at was we have a segregated out energy savings projects budget that's $83,000. Those pieces are obviously facilities related. If you wanted to utilize those funds, that we could still maintain the energy efficiency projects, and those could be funded out of Fund 41, which is for capital improvements. So it could be one, multitudes, or a combination of any of those help to find the dollars that are associated with the conversations we've been having around restructuring.
Randy, one of the things that was brought up when they were talking about the AP at Heritage, was, I felt that they were talking about some of the behavioral problems and so forth that this person could support. Didn't we put a number of resources in there to help with the behavioral issues?
Yeah. Let me answer that on two ways. First of all, the AP position certainly would be an assistance to any of the behavioral issues. Absolutely. I think that's with or without the issues that we discussed earlier this year. When you start to just look at the size of the building and the student needs and having one principal managing that, I think we're at that point where I believe Dan needs some assistance with that. On the flip side, just wanted to answer the second part of your question, which was with regards to resources we added in there. Many of them have stayed, but not all of them. So as you've seen in the first draft of the budget, we're adding some additional dollars for social workers. So that will allow a full-time social worker to remain at Heritage as we had allocated this year. The position that we're actually adding additional funds to in the first draft of this budget is just making sure that we also have that same level of support at Prairie, because we had allocated some of that out of Prairie and now we're backfilling it so that we have adequate social work services in our elementaries. We also had, I guess, what I would call a floater elementary teaching position. We hired a long-term sub that really was able to support in a multitude of areas. That was an area that we paid for out of our sub budget and is not being reallocated. It's not being utilized or brought forward into next year. We also hired a special education teacher, and that position is servicing the kids who have qualified for special education. So that will continue to service the kids there. So some of those will continue, but not all of those services are moving forward into next year. Yeah, I think the big question when we take a look at this plan is certainly, I think the board has seen and heard the needs. It's really a matter of kind of what's your comfort level with determining where the dollar amounts come from. I think Steve and I have laid out a few different options here, all that have a little bit different flavor to them. I mean, just for example, if you chose option 1 and option 4, that gives you more than enough dollars to actually fund this whole area. But it really comes down to kind of philosophies of where you want to look at those funds, and also with your comfort level with the dollars that are associated in the first and second draft of the budget, because certainly these are pulling dollars and allocating them at this time in the budget process.
Randy, I want to thank you for the articulation of the memo. It's very specific what we need. Actually, as you look at some of them, I know it's not our role tonight to approve the proposal of the positions, just figure out how we're going to pay for them should the board approve it. But really, just about every one of them is something that Well, the assistant principal pay, for example, should have been done maybe a year ago when we did everybody. I think our only work crew right now that is differentiated for doing the same work. And so that piece is an important piece. Looking at the 5-year plan, I know there's a big urgency for the assistant principal at Heritage in year 1 or year 2. And with the footprint of that school and a potential construction project, an assistant would really be a big help. So all those things I appreciate the sharing. I'm a little uncomfortable using the maintenance money from the energy savings. I'm not sure that have a lot of support with some of the board members. I'd much rather see us do a combination, maybe 1, 2, and 3 in that. Maybe can we pay for them out of 1 and 2 in year 1, and if we move to the operations budget in year 2, put that in the referendum.
Yes, definitely could do that. And just a quick note, you saw Randy's note associated with number 3. Today I did receive Moody's financial evaluation of our district. Obviously, I haven't had a chance to share that with you or put it in as an agenda item. The next budget committee meeting, I will have that as agenda item and share it with you. We're gonna have to be really careful about fund balance and Moody's evaluation of our district. So I would not recommend looking at this position out of fund balance for the first year and then capturing it in the future referendum due to the implications of the district's bond rating. You'll get a chance to look at that report next month. But I do think a combination of number 1 and number 2 will get us there. We do not budget for additional open enrollment students coming beyond what we typically see in 4K. So our enrollment projection model always does assume the 4K open enrollment students because they always come, but the model does not assume the openings that we have at other grade levels and what kind of interest there might be. So when you see that on June 8th, of course it's just application, so we don't really know who's going to follow through. But you will see that there are new students who have applied in grades that we have openings, which will increase revenues for each student who actually does follow through and enrolls in our district. So I'm confident 1 and 2 would cover the costs. I just want to highlight as well, just to make sure you didn't miss it in Randy's notes under number 1, that typically the savings we've had in that area has been utilized for pay increases in the fall. So by making this investment now, it is very likely that we're going to be really close to the dollar amount that's currently included in the second draft of the budget for pay increases this fall, absent any changes at the state budget level and absent the discussion on transportation that we're going to have in a couple of minutes, because the number 1 item there and the number 2 items there were the 2 main reasons why we typically had 200 to 250,000 to oftentimes work with in the fall to add additional funds to the budgeted pay increases. I just want to make sure that everyone feels like they fully understand that and are okay with that, because we will end up being really, really close to where we're at right now with allocating number 1 and 2 towards the administrative restructuring. I do think it will work, and it'll work really well to look at options 1 and 2 towards administrative restructuring. There may be funds above that based on how many open enrollment students follow through and enroll. But I just want to make sure the expectations are reasonable, that the amounts that we have in there for pay increases right now would very likely look like the amounts that we would have in the fall, pending any other major changes. Does that make sense?
Can you review what those amounts are? Or is it like 2.75?
Yes. So last month at the presenting the first draft of the budget, we had a spreadsheet that showed all groups being, I think, at like 2.72%, which was just a little bit under what's included, which is 2.75. But that on the teacher end, as an example, is CPI plus $600 for points. Now, our handbook that Brian reviewed at 4 o'clock with the HR committee currently includes a statement about a minimum points increase of 600. So what's in the first and second draft of the budget does line up with what is identified as the minimum in the handbook. But I just wanted to make sure that everyone's catching that part about number 1, that statement about what typically the savings have been utilized for. And just be aware that what we presented and previously in the first draft of the budget, what's in the second draft of the budget, we're going to be very, very close to that come the fall.
You know, one of the questions that I've got, Steve, we've got nine new FTEs or 9.5 new FTEs this year in the budget. That seems high from previous years.
So I would say it's a combination of a couple things in there, Jack. We do have an effort to reduce class size, as well as when additional positions are needed due to enrollment growth. So there's 2 things happening there. So like when you look at the 6th grade where we've added 2 positions, it is accomplishing 2 things. It is accomplishing a need to add 1 position to stay within the school board class size policy of 25. But it's secondly allowing the class size to get down to probably around 22, which is more consistent with what we've seen at the K through 6 level. So it's really doing both of those things and addressing a lot of the concerns that we've heard with some of the classes at some of the grade levels getting higher and higher. Same thing at the high school with the positions in there. So I would want to make sure I say that it's accomplishing 2 objectives. It is lowering class sizes in targeted areas, as well as adding FTE that's required due to student enrollment increases.
I would add to that, Jack. We've run our class sizes up to kind of a tipping point where we needed to now start to address some of those class sizes. So some of them at the high school don't equate to a full FTE in every department, but they're certainly adding sections so that we can lower some of them in some of those core content areas, particularly in areas where we were north of 30 kids in a classroom. So that was some of the high school piece. The 6th grade one was similar to our 3rd grade in that there were some growth issues, but also related to just some specific student needs that lower class sizes were going to be helpful for. But yeah, this was, I think, a matter of taking our typical year of how many we had and then just knowing that over time we've kind of hit that point where we have to start addressing some of our class sizes or we're going to be at the max or over on the first day of school, even with some additional sections.
Thank you.
So does the committee want to come back to a possible motion on the second draft and the admin restructuring once we get through the next couple of items, or how would you like to proceed?
I guess let's get through the next couple of items and then see what that's going to do for us. Do you guys agree?
Okay.
Sure.
Sure.
Okay, item C. These are the typical lease agreements that we would move forward to the school board meeting on June 8th. There's one exception. As we discussed at the last board special meeting, we are not recommending approval of a summer lease for the Wisconsin Youth Company. That's this summer only. So there were 2 leases for them last year. Now there's one, which is the school year lease. We are recommending keeping the rates the same. I didn't feel like increasing the rates on the Wisconsin Youth Company at a time where they've not been able to access our building from March on and are not able to run their programs in the summer. It just seemed like leaving it as what it was made sense. We typically increase it by, let's say, $100 or $50 per building per year. But I thought given the circumstances, it might be a nice approach just to leave it the same. The Dane County lease, leases a space from us for $75 per month. And then the new teacher project leases, both of them lease at Heritage. This one's for $300 a month. I would be looking for a motion to bring those 3 leases forward to the June 8th school board agenda, please.
I so move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, agenda item D. Agenda item D we did discuss at last month's committee meeting. I did not have the quotes for Heritage. Heritage was still working on putting together their furniture needs. So what you're going to see in the notes is administration is recommending funding these furniture purchases through the transportation savings from the 1920 budget. These furniture purchases are not included in the 2020-2021 budget. The intermediate school has ordered their furniture out of intermediate school budget accounts, while Heritage has not ordered any furniture at this time. The intermediate school had their process completed a little bit sooner. The intermediate school is requesting that this expense be reimbursed from district's funds, and so is Heritage. We have in recent years at a district level funded the furniture and the equipment for a new classroom as a result of student enrollment growth. The reason why we've done that is building budgets were not designed or are not large enough to handle outfitting entire new classrooms. So administration is recommending taking some of the savings from the transportation line in 1920 and allocating that out towards these furniture purchases for 2 additional classrooms at the intermediate school, and Heritage, the additional equipment and classroom equipment needed for the classrooms at Heritage. And I've attached the details for you, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have on this.
So Steve, the Hendrickson quotes are one for each of the classrooms, is that correct?
For the intermediate school?
Right, because there are 2 quotes there.
There's 2 quotes, yep. Yeah, there's 2 classrooms.
Okay,
Yep.
so it looks like a total of about 88,000 for the 3, for the intermediate plus the Heritage, is that correct?
No, I'm sorry. With the intermediate, there were 2 different options that they were looking at. two different approaches. One of them was
Okay.
35,000, and one of them was
45,000.
45,000. They said either would work. The 45,000 ended up having a closer match to what was put in when the building was originally constructed, but the 35 would match according to the administration at the school.
Steve, what is the savings from our transportation budget?
It's expected, excluding athletics and field trips, it's expected to be between 125 and 150,000 by the time we get through the end of June.
Well, we're expanding classrooms. We need furniture, and
I would like to make it as similar to what we have outfitted the other ones
Right.
as possible. So I would certainly support the 45,000 for the intermediate.
What is the $10,000 difference between these two, Steve?
I can't point to it specifically. I just know that the 45,000 is an approach that more mirrors what we did when we constructed the school, and the 35 is not quite the same. I'm not exactly sure what the differences are between the two of them, to be honest with you. My guess is there's maybe a few pieces of equipment that's not included.
Mm-hmm. Were there multiple quotes on this, or did we go directly to Hendrickson? Or
so Hendrickson is the company that provided the furniture originally. Our policy would require quotes on any purchase of this size, with the exception, unless a vendor was able to supply state or national contract pricing that had previously been bid out by some other entity, and Hendrickson is able to do that. So they are able to provide pricing based on already bid state contracts.
okay. Well, if the building administration says that they can live with the 35,000, why would we spend $10,000 more?
I think it's a matter of equity in classroom to classroom, instructional space to instructional space. It is less if you the less expensive one provides less of the amenities that the other classrooms do have, and I would like to believe that we're just going to try to treat all our students the same.
And remember, it's for 2 classrooms, so it's really only an additional $5,000 per classroom to make them match. And I agree with Mark. I think we need to have equity of materials for all our students.
And why would building administration give us 2 options to choose from if they're satisfied with the 35,000?
Maybe they didn't, I mean, we have the money, maybe they didn't know that we would have that money.
I think, Jack, they were wanting to make sure that in the event that the 45,000 was not possible, there was another option to look at, would be probably the way I would describe it as.
I'd like to move that
Okay.
we support the furniture bid for the intermediate at 45,268 and the heritage bid at 8768, is it? 62 as presented.
I would second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Letter E.
So what you have in front of you in letter E is something that we should probably hold off for the July committee meeting. So the board requested a discussion on the technology budget, especially in lieu of the work at home virtual education environment. Herb was planning, I was requesting for Herb to be here tonight to discuss this topic with you, but he's not able to join us tonight. So if you don't mind, I think it would be best if we just tabled discussion on this until the July meeting of the committee and we can have Herb present.
Yeah, that'd be fine. Do you need a motion on that, or?
Yeah, if you just want a motion to table this item until the July committee meeting.
Can we have a motion to table the technology budget discussion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so for the food service agenda item, there's a topic I wanted to review with you. The school board, as you know, has previously approved a school closure meal program through the end of the school year. Taher has provided a cost estimate for continuing this program through the summer. So in effect, it's about $12.50 per day at the number of meals that we've been roughly serving as an average. Something unique happened that families approved under the National School Lunch Program did receive additional funds to purchase food as the result of COVID-19. The state superintendent sent out an announcement regarding this program and stated that only the National School Lunch Program districts were eligible to receive these funds. However, we know that some Waunakee families have been granted these additional funds and others have been denied them. So at the state level, there does seem to be some significant confusion surrounding this topic of these additional funds. It does look like our families who had been already approved for programs at the state level, like food share, were automatically receiving these additional COVID-19 funds, while those families who had applied for our free and reduced program and were presenting our letter were getting denied. So I think there might have been a technical problem at the state level that they automatically approved our families who were in state programs, but are now denying our families who are turning in our free and reduced letters. Either way, it's not a great situation for those families who are being denied the additional food funds. And we're having a situation where Connie Vaco, our food service director, knows firsthand and has been told by families that they've received the additional money, and has had also a number of people who have told her firsthand that they've been trying to get it by turning the letter in and they keep getting told no. And even when they talk to a supervisor, they've been told no. So we're presenting this in front of you tonight, given the unique circumstances around this, about the potential to continue the school closure meal program throughout the summer. Now, I want to note there's one big difference in the cost here. This is significantly lower than what the school board approved for a meal with Taher for the remainder of the school year. If you remember, the school board approved keeping the Taher staff whole through the remainder of the school year. This is a different situation. This is not keeping people whole. This is paying them for hours worked. Because these folks would not have received hours typically for the school district in the summer anyways. So these costs are significantly lower than what we've been paying before. So if we were to offer the school closure meal program, 3 days a week, it's, roughly $4,000. And if we were to offer that for the 12, 10 weeks-ish of summer, 10 to 11 weeks, depending on when it starts, you're really talking in the $40,000 to $50,000 range, which is significantly different than the situation we're dealing with right now, where our food service program is probably going to be 200,000 to 225,000 short because of the approval to continue making people whole without revenues coming in. So at this point, we really are seeking feedback from the board members as to how you would like to proceed with this. Do you want to bring it forward as a full board discussion next Monday night? Do you want to have a recommendation? Either way, we thought we wanted to get this in front of you so you kind of could see some of the challenges we're faced with this topic.
Go ahead, Jack.
No, go ahead, Mark.
I see this a little akin to the administrative positions. As a committee member, I feel we could approve how to pay for it, and then let the board decide if they want to move forward. I clearly want to go forward with it, but I don't know if we need to support that concept as a committee or not. But the question is, would we have the resources? Were you thinking of using some of the transportation money for that as well, Steve?
Mark, what I would recommend is we would definitely, first of all, it depends. So if the Fund 50 balance has $25,000 or $50,000 remaining as of June 30th, that would be the first draw.
Okay.
So it all depends on where our Fund 50 finishes at the conclusion of the 19-20 school year and how far down our reserves we have to draw.
Okay.
It is possible there may be some funds remaining in Fund 50, or Fund 50 might need to be supported from Fund 10. And then this would just be the next 40 to 50,000 really in that same line of thinking.
So to do this over the summer, the complete the total cost of this program would be what?
It'd be roughly 40 to 50,000. Now that depends on participation. We're assuming 200 per day, which has been our school day numbers, but this could drop off in the summer. As people, might be taking vacations or might not be used to, getting food from school. I'm estimating it, if the full 200 continue to take the program and they do it for the full summer, it would be between $40,000 to $50,000. If participation drops, the cost will drop with it, because we're only paying for the meals served and for the time put in by the staff preparing them, as opposed to during the school year when we've committed to pay people and keep them whole. So the cost will drop if participation drops.
And do we normally supply food in the summer?
We do not. No, this would be a new program. And I think a key component to this is the National School Lunch Program piece and the additional funds that our families are having difficulty accessing. In most communities, this is easy for them because their district is in the National School Lunch Program. They're being approved for these additional resources, and that is providing them with additional funds for purchasing food for their family. In our district, some people are getting it and some people are not.
Do we know how many of those people are, or is it just anecdotal?
It's just anecdotal, but from the information I have gleaned, I think it's the people that we're approving locally who are submitting applications who are not getting the funds versus those who are pre-approved in a state program like food share. I think they automatically got the funds.
So Steve, it seems this is an extension of our trying to help the community with COVID-19. Do you see there's potential refund from these expenses once everything's totaled up and from whatever the federal government's going to do in terms of reimbursement for COVID expenses?
So there's two type of reimbursements that we're aware of right now. One is the federal CARES Act, which is going to be a pretty small payment. It's going to be around $63,000. But we really haven't, the only expense that we've really tied to that's something we want to consider is the Infinite Campus online registration, so families can register without coming into the buildings. But the CARES funding could help food service. The other option is FEMA. Now, FEMA has specifically told us we are only going to be able to get reimbursed for legally obligated expenses on our end. They do not consider us offering food to be a legal responsibility of a school district.
Okay.
They view it as a nice to do thing, but not a required to do thing.
So where else could these kids get food? Food pantries and things like that?
That would be their options if we did not continue this program. There's not as a robust program as what we can offer, because obviously we offer that program for 9 months during the school year, and the volume of the food that we provide. There certainly are opportunities in the community that are great opportunities, but they don't have the volume of what we are able to provide to students on a consistent basis. The reason why I think this is a program we should consider throughout the school year is it really is our decision as a district to offer a program outside of the school national school lunch program. It does allow us many benefits to offer a program in that regard. We are seeing one of the downsides right now is some of our families are having difficulty accessing some of these additional food funds. And I do think it would be a good thing for us to take a look at this program as an opportunity to bridge that gap for these families over the summer while they're having difficulty accessing those funds. And then this is not something, Jack, I would expect would be a long-term commitment. I view this as a commitment related to COVID-19 and the additional funding that our families are having difficulty obtaining, not a long-term commitment to always provide a program in the summer. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. It just, once you add it, it continues. Generally continues as a long-term program. I understand, the situation and the challenges and so forth, that we've got. The community's opening up. Some of the businesses and so forth are starting to open up, it appears like. I guess if it's a one-time shot deal, I guess I don't have a problem with it.
And I think, Jack, it makes sense for us to ask the board to approve it in that manner. I think it makes total sense to ask for an approval for the summer of 2020 only to continue the school closure meal program to bridge the gap to the 2020-2021 school year. That would be all I would be recommending at this time.
I'd like to make the motion that we approve the one-time spending for the summer of 2020 to extend the food program to the end of the summer school. And that we have the resources to fund it internally.
Can I add a little discussion to that before I finish or second that motion? Would it be appropriate to ask Connie Vacco and Jessica? I know they're very connected to the families that are receiving the foods in the last couple months.
Right, yep.
Is it possible for them to reach out to the families and get an idea in advance to our June 8th meeting, if possible, families that feel this is a need that is important?
Sure.
You know, I support doing this, but you know, I don't want to make the food and the families. I mean, we've never provided it in the past, and you know, if they have a different plan, then maybe it isn't necessary. But I think Connie and Jessica might be able to really help direct us to the need of what the families are feeling.
Yep, absolutely. I can send that email out as soon as we're done meeting.
Thanks,
Steve. I guess one other thing too is how are the donations coming in to support our food program?
Yep. I'll get an update on that too.
Because I would assume that everybody wanted to help early on, and now are we making a plea to people, or do they just have to know that the donation process is there?
We made two or three. Yeah, we haven't made one recently, Jack. We did 2 or 3 of them early on, and then we backed off. I want to say we're probably a little bit north of 10 grand, but we can update that.
I would like to note that one of our colleagues broadcasted on a webpage that we were getting reimbursed from this, from the government. And so a number of people may be mistaken as to how it's being funded.
Right. Yeah,
I mean, there definitely was a hope that there would be a reimbursement source coming in, and we definitely were wanting to seek any of those avenues. At the time we had talked about this last, we did not know what FEMA's official position on this was going to be. But the board could allocate the CARES money or a portion of the CARES money towards something like this. Or we could, of course, seek additional funding from the community. And I think if we keep the school closure program going through, meal program through the summer, it does make sense to request community assistance an additional time just to see what it generates.
Well, I think obviously what we should do is we're not getting federally reimbursed for this, but we want to be part of the community. We can provide that service. You know, we need some help.
Right. Yep.
You know, we really do, because, you know, I think there's a lot of hidden cost here that we don't know at this point, and sounds like we're not going to know until August, you know, where we are in the budget with some of the challenges that we've got.
Okay, sounds good. I will get that additional information for June 8th.
So do we need a vote, or?
There's a motion.
There's a motion on the floor.
Right. So I would second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
I'm going to jump into G, and then we'll go back and talk about, ask for a motion on the second draft, and if you want to make a change with or add the administrative restructuring. So with the budget planning process, there are 2 major wild cards right now that we are faced with. They're both significant, and they're both incredibly unusual to have that at this point in the process. The first one is the possibility of a state budget repair bill, We've talked about that one before. I have on the cover sheet of the second draft of the budget a statement about this document is based on the already approved state of Wisconsin budget. So we know that if there ever is a state budget repair bill, and if school districts are targeted as one of the areas for state reductions, we're going to have to probably significantly rework portions of this budget. The second wild card is more of an emerging one. That's the topic of transportation. I know Randy has shared this information with you before, and he's been sharing the information he's hearing out of all of the various webinars that he's been participating in and phone calls. But transportation is one of those topics that we are going to have to watch very, very closely. Current guidance is in the neighborhood of 15 to 17 students per bus. And if you can imagine the number of times a bus route is going to have to be run to bring students into school with that kind of a capacity, this has the potential to be, quite frankly, even bigger than the impact of a state budget reduction. There's two keys to this that I just want you to be thinking about. The first one is you can't really even start to figure out transportation until you know the capacity of the students that are going to be brought, the capacity of the buildings and the classrooms, and the number of students that are going to be actually brought to school on a daily basis. And then secondly, and this is a very important one for the school board to consider, are we going to try to keep our existing transportation policies in place, or are we going to suspend them for the 2020-2021 school year? And that includes very, very challenging aspects like daycare transportation, transportation between attendance boundaries, transportation within the state law required limits. There's a number of variables here. I'm only bringing this to your attention because I feel like it's something that has to be on everybody's radar. But the reality of it is the transportation item absolutely has the potential to be a bigger financial impact than what we might lose during a state budget reduction process. So it is significant, to say the least. Our transportation budget is over $1 million. That's with one AM run for K4, one AM run 512, and the same thing on taking students home. So if we're limited to 15 to 17 students on a bus, and you know what the capacity of a bus is, and you know that we hear all the time about our buses are too full, meaning a lot of the buses have 70 kids on them, they're going to be running those routes over and over and over again to try to bring the students into school. And the fiscal impact of that cannot be understated. Now,
I think the other thing you look at is logistics. You know, if you've got to do, basically you've got 20 students per bus, and you got a 70 capacity, that's almost 3 runs.
Oh, for sure.
And, what are you going to start at 5 o'clock and start picking kids up at 5?
Right. What you just said, Jack, is critically important. I've talked about this before with our administrative team. You would have the potential, and let's just say, talk about a typical starting time at the K through 4 level. you are going to have students arriving up to an hour to an hour and a half after the instructional day has started. So I'm not even sure what teachers are going to be able to do in that first hour, knowing they have several more rounds of kids coming. And you're right, Jack, it is an absolute logistical and curricular related issue as much as it is a fiscal issue. There are significant issues.
I think before you can start talking about transportation, you got to figure out how many students are going to be in the building on a given day. Have we decided that?
You don't have the guidance. Yeah, that's part of what we're waiting for the guidance on, Jack, is when we once we get to phase 2 of the forward Dane plan, then they start to identify how many kids and some of those processes. Right now, the guidance we have, if we follow it for summer, the max you can have is like 15 in a class, so about half capacity. Mm-hmm. So under that type of scenario, you're able to bring in, even if you're logistically able to do it, half your students for discussion's sake. So you've got discussions of A-B day type schedules where one set of kids go on day A and another set go on day B, and then you flip. So those are some of the models being discussed out there, but your point is spot on. You really can't, you start to see the domino effect of what are the decisions that we can make and how do we start to plan, when the driver is really how many kids can you have in a building at a time, and what are going to be the social distancing requirements that once we get there.
And you have other pieces as well. We've already mentioned the financial impact, but I listened to a neighboring superintendent discuss this to a degree, and logistically, are there enough buses? Are there enough bus drivers? No. And even if there are, can we truly afford that model? And so, if ideally we can bring all the kids back, but it's got to be with the busing limitations, I don't see how that's even a conceptual possibility. If we're going half the kids, then you've got the logistics of how do you get them there throughout the day, and again, what's the cost for that, and what's the cost in terms of equity of education, and so I don't know where this takes us, but the transportation piece really looks like a huge factor in what we can or can't do.
Randy, is there any discussion of, as they have phase 1, which we're in phase 2, is there any change in that busing law or recommendation when you move to phase 2 and phase 3? Is busing mentioned?
No, right now they don't. Busing is a standalone item, as Steve attached there. That's the extension of what we have.
Okay.
That really doesn't even address phase 1 or phase 2, I don't think, or phase 3 for that matter. It just addresses, and what I've heard from public health, and this is verbally, is they did not see that necessarily changing as they're looking social distancing as a part of all of the plans. So the other piece that's coming down with transportation is Wisconsin Department of Health Services and DPI are putting together some guidelines for districts on transportation on a statewide level. And then our local public health department will revisit this once they see those guidelines from the state. Now, do I see them drastically changing? I have a hard time seeing them changing a great deal, but you start to now see the pictures as far as how do we start to transition people back to school. When you start looking at like summer, transportation's not required. I don't even think we dive down that road from one, a logistical standpoint, and two, a financial standpoint. And then we have to figure it out as far as how we're going to approach our model and support the type of transportation for fall. And then it gets into pieces. Can people opt out of it so we can reduce our numbers and then can we provide transportation to those who need it the most? Those are some questions that are still needing to be answered.
Is this something that you're going to address in your listening session on Tuesday or tomorrow?
Address it in terms of having the discussion and bringing it to light as an issue, yes. As far as being able to answer those questions, as far as here's definitively what we're doing, no. I mean, I don't know what our model will be in the fall because we don't have guidelines yet as far as what we can actually do once we get there. So that's the piece we are pressing public health on, is to get as much detail as we can so we can start putting some options together without kind of spinning out on issues just based on all the issues we've just been talking about here. There's 2 or 3 issues that really drive this whole thing. Group size is number 1, 2 is transportation, and 3 is wellness.
Right.
You put those 3 together, those are the ones that really will impact what your program will look like. But I think the piece we have to prepare ourselves for is transportation could look extremely different than what we've done in the past. And the instructional model that we have as far as how many kids can be in the building and how we're going to deliver it in the fall may start off in a manner that's not traditional. And I think we have to be prepared for that.
Even in terms of, I read through the guidelines, and I mean, there's not going to be a immediate turnaround, route 1, route 2, or whatever. I can't imagine how long it's going to take to disinfect a bus before you can send out another group of kids.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, there's so many different moving pieces there. It's really frightening, I'm afraid.
Yeah,
Is there a way that we could incentivize parents not to take the bus?
You can do individual contracts, which I think is also cost prohibitive.
Well,
Those
good
are all
information, but I don't think we can even go down that road until we know more facts.
No,
I just
this is an issue of wanting to put it on your radar that this is an issue. And it'll be a piece that I'm going to talk about. I'll bring it up as far as some of the factors we're dealing with at the listening session tomorrow. But I'll also be bringing it as a and really as an informational item of what we're trying to work through when we get to the June 8th meeting. And then start to look at really timelines for when we have to have some decisions for us to be able to effectively plan for the fall.
So what do we have to do? We need a motion then for, what do you need, Steve?
So I'm just looking to double back to the second draft of the budget. I'm looking for a motion to move that forward, and then it's up to the committee about whether you want to attach the admin restructuring planning to that second draft. You want to recommend incorporating the admin restructuring plan and looking at options 1 and 2 to pay for it. You could do both of those in one motion and have that be your recommendation, or you can keep them separate. But we'd be looking to make sure that the second draft and the admin restructuring has the dialogue next Monday at the regular monthly board meeting.
I move we move it forward, the administrative restructuring, along with the plan to use item 1 and 2 to fund it.
And Mark, do you want to also move the second draft of the budget with that?
And the second draft of the budget along with the second draft of the budget, yes.
And I would second both of those things.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So then we go to future agenda items, discussion, action on proposals, other items for discussion, future agenda items.
I am good at this time.
Okay. Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I guess we're adjourned.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you all. Appreciate that.